Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and you are very welcome back. It has been a while since we've looked at the state of the game in tier list format, at any rate. I do an awful lot of complaining outside of that, but either way, welcome in, and let's crack on. So before we go on, let's just start with the tiers. D tier, I have no idea why it's really in the game. It's either broken, it has no functionality, its win conditions are weird, or it's purely a utility stick that has no utility in duels. Throwing kind of does what it says. You're showing up to have fun, and unfortunately in a competitive bracket, you're probably not going to have fun. Mid, for B tier, is more or less exactly what it says in the tin. Middle of the road, capable of doing well, but you're probably better using a better tool if you want to end up in that top 4, top 2, kind of laying in a bracket. Can win. The A tiers are competitive setups that can do very, very well. They're likely to get into that top 4, sometimes even breaking into that top 2 with some very good play. S tier, these are going to be your finals for 90% of tournaments, most likely, depending on the rule set. Obviously, some rule sets try and bring this a little bit further, and then we'll get to Oh God, Why, which kind of does what it says in the tin. The exact inverse of this, either due to bugs or due to shenanigans. It's just obscene, and I don't know why it's in the game, and it is severely broken. So let's start off right off the bat, and we're starting it off the way it was meant to be. I'm putting this in D tier. I actually don't know, outside of a poison self-proc, why you would use these perfumes. I don't understand. There was a funny one shot that you could do way back when, but even then, I'd still only put it a couple of tiers up. It didn't just it's just there's nothing for it. I don't understand. They're poorly thought out, poorly implemented, and in a way I'm kind of glad that they're not running well. I don't know though. I think that these things are kind of garbo. I think that they get in dumpster tier pretty quickly. I don't see the win condition outside of being very annoying, and being very annoying does not a good setup make. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe someone's going to show up in bracket and really do some work. But the only usefulness of it is a poison self-proc, and I'ma be real, there's better ways to do that with better setups with poison. So, I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But yeah, there you go. Great Katana. First place in A tier, I think, is pretty decent. Great Katana, obviously, off Rakshasa is a tier in and of its own. But when we talk about the two-handed moveset, off Rakshasa could probably put this into S tier, I think. I'm going to be cautious. I've kind of overstepped in the past, and I don't want to do it again. I would say the Great Katanas belong at probably the top of A. They fill a very similar use case to late PSGS or ladder restricted PSGS, in the sense of they have a fairly standard game plan. They have the ability to vortex people. They have a really fast standing R1, second standing R1 I should say, and they have a means of initiating with the runner one, but it's very vulnerable to backstabs. It can be spaced out pretty well. The only real one that you have to worry about is if flaming is regular Great Katana, if Flaming Strike is legal, and likewise, I think the Rakshasa offhand with a bunch of other things does really well. Off Rak is a tier in and of itself, but as a class in and of itself, I think that Great Katanas kind of go into that kind of top spot of A tier, around there somewhere. I think that's fair. That's probably where I keep it. Maybe with Rak, as more people develop on it and as more time passes, we could start to see, for the sake of that off Rak Sasha, ending up in like lower echelons of S tier. But that's how I feel about it. It's an interesting setup. It's kind of cool. There's an awful lot of the main hands that really allow it to work, but I think that that's partially an awful lot of the main hands doing a considerable amount of work there as well in keeping the other person. Like Greatsword. I used to think that this was up here or here, and now I'm not so certain anymore the more I've played in it. Latent, so that is to say when the the latency, the amount of milliseconds between you and the other person in terms of the internet connection can make this quite difficult. I'm going to put it up at A because it has a fairly standard game plan. It goes for those jump R2s, goes for standing R2s two-handed. You can have that flaming strike on it. You can have sword dance on it. It can actually hit people with the CR1. Paired does an awful lot of damage, even if I don't think it's great. One-handed can be poised at 121 poise. So it's not ideal, but I still think that this thing can show up to bracket and do very well. I know that it's won at least one beginner's bracket in the last while. I know Frosty's done pretty okay with it in brackets as well. I think the charm has gone off on it. I could bring it down into mid-tier, but I think that we'll leave it in A tier for now, just because you always have that risk of sword dance, which is banned on my rule set, but that's neither here nor there. Excuse me. Throwing blades. I don't know what to do with them. These are a weird one. Saucy's done quite well with them in bracket at a very high level, but everyone else I've seen use them has been kind of middle of the road. So I'm gonna jokingly put it in throwing. I'll figure out where to put it later on. It's a good finisher with someone's low because it is so low recovery. You have the ability to spam out those R2s as well, which is kind of neat. But I'm not particularly impressed with it. I could put it up to mid-tier just because of its utility as a finisher, that it's very hard to engage with it when someone does have it, and it doesn't cost anything except a little bit of endurance. So let's just leave it there for now, B-tier for now. I might move it around. Claws. So there are two of them that are dangerous. Raptor Talons, which can basically two-shot someone with a bleed proc. Very funny setup. But Claws of Night. This is the first one, just for the sake of Claws of Night. I'm putting this up into, oh god, why? Raptor Talons on their own are like here to here. But Claws of Night just do so much damage. Even though you don't have the true combo into the Ash of War, it doesn't really matter anymore. You can still like two-shot people like standing even without the bleed proc. It's just, it's obscene. It can win tournaments on its own. This might be a little bit of knee-jerk on my part, but I do think that Claws of Night are completely bugged in a way that's in the opposite way to how the perfume bottles are. And strictly in terms of tournaments, every rule set has them blanket banned. And when they weren't blanket banned, they were just obscene. So I think that they've earned their first spot in the oh god why category. They are very, very nasty. Very, very nasty indeed. And I do not recommend allowing them in any rule set unless you're looking forward to whatever you see. I think you could make an argument that Claws of Night could end up in the upper echelons of S tier. Just for how ubiquitous the ban is, I'm just putting it up here. I think that that's fair. Again, you have the same combo as the regular Claws of Night. I say combo. You just mash at people and they drop. It does obscene damage, and I do not recommend it. Reapers, though. Reapers have a really fun game plan. I can't remember where I put them before. I'm probably going to put them about, like, low A. High B is probably where I feel these things are. We'll see how it lies. We might have to move some stuff around as we go. But yeah, I'm going to put them up here right now. I think that there's better options. You have that off dag, you go on the arcane build, you pump out that poison, you get your mushroom crown, you get extra damage. The only problem is it relies on other people playing in a very specific way in order. They have to give you something to work with Reapers. Which again, as you've probably heard me say to death, any setup that requires the other person to play a certain way, I don't think is very good. I do not think it's very good. I think that something that gives you agency in a fight is the most important part, unless it stops the other person completely from doing anything, or completely restricts all of their options, which we'll get into in later picks. I think that it goes into can win. It goes very well with other offhands as well. It gets those poison build-ups, guarantees bleed procs. I think on Arcane, I know an awful lot of people have elected to go for strength at the moment. But I think regular Scythe on an Arcane build does an insane amount of work, and I actually kind of dig it. It's a fun setup. It plays off of a CR1 into standing R1 mix. You go for your couple of CR1s, they think they can jump it, and then you go for your standing R1, you anti-air. You have like halberd or run R1 into a run R2 mix in case they try and strafe that. An awful lot of it is people will figure out how to abuse the moveset, and then it's your game then to punish their attempts at abusing it, basically. I think it's really neat. Goes well with some... It's one of the few arcane weapons that can actually do pretty well. And you can pump damage into it with your both your talisman that boosts after poison and bleed proc, and the mushroom crown or various mask or whatever that does the exact same thing. Neat. I like it a lot. Mwah. Chef's kiss. Is it the best of the best? Not really. There's better options for what it does, but for what it is, it's pretty solid, and I like it a lot. Hand to hand. These are a weird one. They're probably one of the most honest weapons in the game for a whole lot of reasons. They have some really cool Ashes of War in the terms of Pan Blast, which can basically tank anything. You've Dane's Whirlwind, which can punish people when they try to strafe or mash into you. You have an awful lot of options to this, and they're also a really nice pick into shields. Obviously, there's no shields on this except the funny one. But yeah, it's a neat little setup. It can do some really nice work, but unfortunately, it doesn't have the damage. And it loses an awful lot of... Even though it has a very, very fast running R1, I don't think it's great. You can poise chip into an R2 as well, which is also pretty handy on the two-handed. I personally like the two-handed moveset in Danes. Run R2, jump R2. You can go for run R1s to get chip. You can go for jump. Yeah, it's a well-rounded moveset, but I just don't think it's able to compete with the other things. I think they can get bullied an awful lot, especially by hyper armor setups or setups with the super armor. So it kind of suffers from the fact that it's a two-part move, and the jump R2s don't guarantee that break. It's cool. I think it's neat. I like it a lot, but I don't think it's great. Bear Claws. You see, they have the Beast Claws have a very funny Ash of War. That basically has insane hyper armor, can't be broken, and is very, very fast. You also, of course, have Barbaric Roar on these things, which can do insane work as well. Same with this here, hand to hand. There might be a better version of this. There's also weird things where your hitbox becomes super skewed, so you can dodge stuff. As an offhand as well, it has very, very fast cancel windows. The same as this here. I just... For the offhand, I might have to move both of these up. We're going to leave them here for now, and we'll see where it lies. I'm going for very high B, very low A currently, especially for the Beast Claw, for its cancel windows and as an offhand, and for that very silly Ash of War that has escaped me, the name of it. But yeah, it's very fast. It's kind of neat. Now we get our first S tier, Curved Swords. The Shamshir Simi. Shamshir, of course, is the best one, best in class. It's a backswing setup. That is to say, when the other person rolls, your second swing will be able to catch them as they come out of the roll. It has an element of poise chip in it as well, so you can chip, swap over to something that doesn't have guaranteed poise break, and you'll get that. Yeah, it's an interesting setup, and it exists purely on its frame data. It's a frame data stick. You have very, very low recovery. Reasonably fast startup. It's not unreactable, but it's reasonably start. It has guaranteed chip in the form of, I say guaranteed, mostly guaranteed chip in the form of backswing. Has decent damage, decent range. It ticks all of the boxes for what a setup could be. It was very, very popular a while ago, but the lack of poison has definitely made people kind of move off of it, because you could proc poison, get your damage buff, and then go to town. And even with your damage greases and stuff like that stacked on top of it as well, it could do some pretty nasty damage for how fast it is. Ultimately, it is reactable, and that can be a problem, except when the other person rolls and you get your backswing. So that's something to keep in mind. Curved Swords are still up here; they haven't moved any. Yeah, Curved Sword Shamshir, very, very good setup. Highly recommend trying it, especially if you're trying to learn the game and learn your positioning, because the backswing lives and dies off of that. Now we're going to Thrusting Shield. I'm putting it up here. Great shields in general, just with how they function, they force the other person to play in a very particular way. But now that you have an actual hitbox in the end of it, it becomes very, very nasty. It's a very dry. it's an endurance fight for better or worse against the thrusting shield. They have really bad matchups into fists. They have very, very bad matchups into anything that for good does good stamina damage, and kick as well as your bread and butter against it. But the reason I put it up here is you have to use those things in order to beat it. If I was to look at a matchup matrix and kind of, this probably loses into it. This can do okay. This loses into it. This loses into it. It can take out S tiers if they don't have kick by virtue of themselves. So I think the fact that it forces people to play in a certain way kind of justifies this spot here. Very, very strong. There's some people who would say even with the other setups that can do well into it aren't great. Doesn't matter. I'd still fairly content putting it here. I'd have to do like, you know, your proper matrix to see what setups can actually beat it effectively. But for the most part, I think it justifies that S tier spot. It forces the other person to never press, and any press you do could risk you basically getting one shot by a riposte or getting an R2 from a fist and just forcing you in the back foot till you can counter pressure. It's really, really strong. Yeah, there's not much to say other than that. And now, probably the thing that's gotten the best, I never thought I'd put it here. I'm going to put Colossal Weapons into A tier. This might be slightly controversial because it's still reactable. But the amount of damage that it can output and the fact that you do have a little bit of a mixed game in terms of whether or not you go for a runner or one or not, I think that it still justifies that place. How high I'm going to put it is kind of questionable. We'll readjust everything, but I do know that it is in A. It's probably going to lose into anything in S tier, which you have your CL1, which does insane damage, is very, very fast, and the animation blend from memory isn't ideal, but you can still force a mistake out of someone, and if you can force that mistake, you can punish it for an insane amount of damage, and that mistake being a bad roll. So a little bit of a weird vortex setup. It's new, it's hot off the press. Maybe I'm putting a little bit too much faith into it and might end up slightly lower, but it's basically PSGS with hyper armor, which that hyper armor makes it quite annoying to have to deal with. But the only thing you really have to worry about is that CL1. Alright, Great Spears, another A tier setup, and these things lost out by a fairly considerable margin. So allow me to kind of explain very, very quickly what happened to these things. The tracking is now much poorer unless you use a shunter in your main hand, which is a bug, technically speaking, but what part of this game isn't bugged. The tracking got taken down considerably. It lost an awful lot of its damage, but it's still more or less the exact same as it was before. It's still your vortex setup. It's just even harder to use now. And because of that use case, I think something like Grey Katana or alternatively a Colossal Weapon has kind of gone into that kind of category. As to which one of these I'd put where, I'm kind of undecided, but yeah, I don't really mind. I'm on the fence about which one would be which here, the higher. I think that this is probably that little bit just more damage. This is probably a little bit easier to blend, but has even more counterplay. Can be backstabbed an awful lot easier. This is the backstabbing. This ain't easy. You have Golden Land and stuff like that can just force people off. But Shunter is dead. Long live Shunter. And regular Great Spears, I think they're pretty solid. I think that's really cool. Still, they're still an A tier. They still just destroy most of the rest of the game. They have bad matchups into things that are better than them, but then again, that's just the nature of the beast. Still a perfectly fine setup. I think it's great. Katanas. B tier. I'm actually going to put them probably around here somewhere. They're probably going to go somewhere around here. They are probably the biggest losers. They've only gone down a tier just because an awful lot of what they do is poisable. However, as with all poise chip setups, it just means that it insta-loses into hyper armor, and I say insta-loses is a bit of an exaggeration, but things where you have that poise reset are going to hurt it disproportionately. Katanas, you still have your unsheath and spin slash. They're still very, very strong on it. It's been a while since we've seen someone take it into bracket and do well with it, even with those things, with specifically spin slash allowed, at least on my rule set. As an experiment, just to see what would happen, and I think I've seen it all of once or twice to no great fanfare, so I don't really, whatever. Even if it is very strong, at least it gives people a reason to take your one-handed cat. They did get buffed with those R2s recently, but it doesn't really replace the one-handed moveset and the fact that it had backswing. Yeah, there's a few things that really hold katanas back now, and it's mostly around the fact that they don't really have a reliable poise chip. Unless you have a dagger, and even then dagger is better on other things. Yeah, it's kind of a shame. You have your R2s now as well, which come out very fast. We might end up moving this might move up a little bit more, but from being a dead center A tier setup pretty much before into this, it's kind of sad to see, especially given that PS Cats was a very fun setup to watch. But yeah, I think that it kind of belongs there. Curved Greatsword, I'm going to put this slightly below Reapers, because CGS off-dag is still a real setup, even if it is a means to get around targeted Flaming Strike bans. It's still really solid. It's still really good. I still really think that it's a setup that can do quite well. As for how good it is, questionable. Your off dagger and your flaming strike are going to be doing that, and if the flaming strike is banned, you just have a hyper armor into a little bit of chip damage with your off dagger. It's pretty good. I don't see that there's anything necessarily wrong with it. I just think that there's better setups than it. I could be convinced to bring it down into mid. Beast Claws could come up. There's a few. The problem with the game now is there's a bunch of setups that are like around the same, that it's very hard to pick where everything needs to go. Two-handed curves greatsword, not great. One-handed with off-dag has insane phantom range, does decent work. But I digress. We have a bunch more things to go. Daggers. Oh me, oh my. Best offhand in the game, hands down. Just because of its cancel windows. It's very fast. You can get out of dodge very, very quickly. Literally. It can literally dodge faster than most other things in the video game. It doesn't have poise break, but who needs it if you can't hit what you can't catch? Daggers, and now two-handed, you have your Earth Steels that just hit like a truck and come out very fast with those either two-handed or one-handed. It's chip, poise chip in the extreme. Bunch of setups, live or die. Like you see Reapers, Great Sword. I would argue even Katanas could have a place with an off dag as well now. Yeah, it's great for proccing because it's unreactable. You get those bleed procs in. It's just insane. Daggers are nuts. And I think that it's more than earned its place in S tier. If it was questionable before, then it most certainly doesn't deserve. It's just really good now. And then we go on to my baby straight swords. They've lost a little bit of their luster. I think they're better than Reapers. Yeah, straight swords are in a funny spot because they've lost their CR1 and they've gained an R2. CR1 was unreactable. They could still hit, but it's poisable now at 115 poise. So that's a bit of a shame, but in the same vein, your 90% of your use with that is JL1 on power stance straight swords, or alternatively, your standing L1's power stance again. That is your bread and butter. You have cute things you can do carrying. Now go for that block with deflect here. Go for your R2s to get those blocks in and then punish people, which is really, really cool, but very few people do it, and it's not really worth losing the power stance moveset to go for stuff like that. It might be a tech that's developed moving on into the future, but yeah, I like power stance straight swords. I think they're still A tier. They can win. I think that with good play, solid fundamentals, and a decent understanding of the game, anyone can do well with them. And now with their damage nerfed after the DLC, I think that they've just gone down half a tier pretty much rather than anything else. Very, very strong. Get your carrions, get your swords of light, get your nobles, get your codeds, go fun, win prio. Fun and games. And then we go on to something that also hasn't changed very much. Thrusting Sword. Thrusting Sword is obscene. For the same reason as most good setups are in the game, it has very, very low recovery, very, very good range, decent damage, has the opportunity to go for counter hits and then roll out. And then if they try and pressure you out of a roll, you have a rolling R1 that can just punish them for days, roll in for days, meta-defining even. The thing that kept even restricted spears in check was the fact that your rolling R1s could just do insane work for you. Excellent setup. Probably one of the best in the video game. If the other things didn't exist, and it's one of the few things that can still compete with some of those stronger tiers of setups. Unrestricted, it's a crime because you can't corner anyone to do decent damage to them, and yeah, they will never press. They will exist in your periphery, and they slowly but surely chip you down until you give up out of frustration, cry for days. You hate to see it. All right, Gugs. Gugs. I said to Darcy I could be convinced for B tier, and I wasn't lying. So Gugs is one of those setups that you have animation blend that can force people to make mistakes, but it's strafable for starters on lower latencies, which is very, very nasty. It's slow, has recovery, has an awful lot of things going against it, but I still see some UGS players do some really good work with those animation blends, forcing those mistakes and getting punishes in. So I don't think it's terrible. In fact, I don't think it's that. I think it's slightly better than before, given that those R2s now have a use case. Maybe slightly, ever so slightly. It's cool. It's a cool setup. I think it's neat. It's a counterpick setup. If someone's going into something that plays off of Poise Chip, you're better off going for much faster like hyper armor weapons. But I think that Gugs is a use case, and I'm actually going to put it towards the end of B tier. Just a little bit of a shout out to it. I think it's solid. I think you could do work with it. And I think that more people are playing around with things like it. So there you go. There's your Colossal Swords. Throwing Blades, again, I'm kind of feeling a little bit more here because they do have that particular use case. They do have that particular use case for using as a finisher. So we might just put that a little bit ahead. But again, there's other options. So, Twin Blades. The weird one. The weird S tier setup that I have no idea how to fight. Twin Blades is a Poise Chip setup. So if we look at this here, we have Whiff Punish. We have the wonderful little thing called Backswings. We have Poise Chip. Chip as an offhand. Or R2s is just a priority machine. And then we have proper Poise Chip. Two-handed Twin Blades. Hit Poise Chip with your Run R1. Break and hit for a metric shit ton of damage with your Run R2. Mwah. You have Jump R2s as well that can do some decent work as well, that come out remarkably fast. It's another one of those setups that you can't mash into because it can just do insane damage. I think the first time I seen this setup was like, man, is this Bloodborne? It's like you're going for a running attack into mash. My god, this is crazy. But yeah, that's more or less Twin Blades. Run R1 into mash, go to town, or alternatively Poise Chip into those big R2 burst damage. Explosions, good setup, hard to use. And it does have very, very poor, like all setups that are Poise Chip, struggles into hyper armor. So I think that deserves a space here. KGS, Steeple, Claymore, becoming more and more popular. I'm actually going to put both of these kind of down here. I think that there's just better tools. I think that they do get a little bit of a shout out though, because of that off-dag setup that you can do with them. I know Turquoise has been using KGS off-dag, not KGS off-dag, sorry, but using Steeple off-dag. I know Frost, it's a Frosty setup as well, even if he hasn't used it in a hot minute. Does have issues one-handed with the lack of poise, but two-handed you do, of course, in the KGS especially, have that standing R1 into standing R1 in or Piercing Fang mix that can do an awful lot of work. You can jump, you can face tank, you have good options into people that are going to try and mash into you. It's just good. It's a perfectly fine setup. It's just that hyper armor weapons as a rule aren't great. They're not fast enough to be able to keep up. Yeah, I think that it's fine. I think it's a perfectly fine setup. I think you could probably go into bracket with it and not embarrass yourself if you play it well enough. People might not enjoy fighting you because funny hyper armor, but that's just the nature of the beast. All right. Axes. If we're talking about off-axe, we're going here. Off-axe is basically your answer to if you don't have the patience to play dagger and want priority. There you go. Use your off-axe. If you're going to talk about two-handed warped axe or something along those lines, you're going to put it somewhere kind of in the lower echelons of A tier. Backswing setup that can just nuke people, but very, very short. So there's plenty of counterplay options against it, but it can still basically mess up the rest of the game here. I'm getting more and more confused as to where to put these, but we'll figure it out in a minute. So I'm going to put, for the sake of off-axe, and the fact that even two-handed it's not terrible, and even in the offhand it's not awful, I'm just going to put it up here in S tier with dagger kind of paired. I'd actually consider it a little bit lower here, just because it doesn't have the exact same... It's as fast, but it doesn't have the same recovery windows, unless you go for that second swing for backswing on the off-axe. But then you're playing for backswing. If you're on a poise chip, you're going to go for dagger. If you're looking for priority for the ability to guarantee that poise break, you're going to look for the off-axe. That's kind of the decision-making process that you have to make there. But I definitely do believe that off-axe is very, very strong and enables an awful lot of filth from other setups. So, yeah, there you go. That's more or less my feelings there. As we crack on heavy thrusting sword, it is middle of the road. Probably better than this. Probably not better than the... Ooh, we're getting complicated here, folks. I'll probably put these up here for that offhand. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. Yeah. Heavy thrusting sword is a setup that's absolute dog water on paper, except for sword lance. In fact, by virtue of sword lance, I'm just going to put it up the top of B tier. It's a hyper armor trade setup that gives you a really nice true combo in the form of the R1. But the rest of the HTS class is kind of left behind. It got me with the days when it was up here, when it had that true combo and no one knew what Void Tech was, so everyone was just doing it randomly. But yeah, it's a middle of the road setup. Slightly better than average being, but at the same time, it's kind of nah. I think outside of a HTS main's hands, it's not very good, and even then, people just get set up diffed left and right. Sip, of course, is a phenomenal HTS main. Same with Frosty, even if they haven't really been touching the setup all that much lately. It's a shame. I'll always say that HTS is one of those things that's the coolest setups to watch someone play, but what can you do? Hammers! This goes into A tier, in a weird part of A tier, because Stone Club is ridiculous. Stone Club with Hyper Armor is even more ridiculous. It's a neat little... It's neat. I think it's very, very neat. Hyper Armor trades, you basically have to whiff punish it by a kilo so that the second hit doesn't hit you, or alternatively wait for that second hit and then go in for your punish, because that's your punishment window. It's quite annoying to fight against, but annoying doesn't make it amazing. It's just, of the Hyper Armor setups, it's probably the better one, except for the Colossal Weapons. Which actually, now that I think about it, I'd probably put that like this. You could make an argument for it to be in B tier, but I think on most rule sets with Flaming Strike allowed, it's kind of a bit of a sleeper. It's in the equation. Someone can pick, especially as a counter pick as well. It's quite useful because you have that ability against Poise Chip to just mash at them, and they kind of have to cry that they didn't pick something that wasn't Poise Chip. Funny Poise implementations because of that Hyper Armor resetting Poise after every hit. Pretty nasty, pretty cool. It goes kind of into this, it can win. You could probably see, I've seen people swap to it in finals when they're not quite sure what else to do. They'll pull out this thing and just mash with impunity and try and take a stock that way. But yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, great axes. C tier. I don't think they're very good. I think Godfrey's is it Godfrey's? I can't remember whose axe it is. It begins with G. Not Gideon's. Doesn't matter. I've never been impressed with these things, and they've just gotten they weren't great before, but they've consistently been getting crept. I think they're pretty good. I think they're pretty neat, and I think that you can knowledge check people with I command thee kneel on the weapon that's names completely escaped me because I see it so little. But outside of that, it's a Hyper Armor setup, which means that these things probably have the ability to hit it a little bit better. Maybe with the exception of Greatswords and Curved Greatswords, but you're probably going to have an off dagger on hand to deal with that. These things can just hit it and roll out, or alternatively out-trade it. Yeah, I just don't see what its win condition is outside of Hyper Armor trades, and there's much better tools for all of that. Actually, I'm put Katana a little bit above this because it still has some options. Yeah, probably around here. Yeah, and put it around there. So yeah, pretty disappointing. It's probably one of the lower tier setups. Flail is slightly faster than it, so therefore it goes slightly above it, even if it has not great damage, not great range, not your magical ashes of war that you would have on other things don't make a difference to it. Yep, just not great. Hyper armor, I don't think it's great. I think it's ever been ideal. I could be convinced to bring it into the lower echelons of like B tier, but I think it's getting pretty crowded up there, weirdly enough, which is kind of nice to see. Pretty nice to see. Great hammers. Great hammers are one of those things that your large club moveset has the ability to actually hit things with the CR1. So I'm actually going to put it above Colossal Sword because it does have an option, even if it isn't great, that is quote-unquote unreactable. So your CR1 on these things can be, you can free aim it in such a way that the beginning of the hitbox comes out, and it's actually one of the fastest attacks in the game. Can't be strafed because you're free aiming it pretty much, unless you overextend. Is it amazing? No. Is it worthy of having in the conversation? Yes, I think so. I think it's pretty good. I think I like it a lot, and I think it deserves to be there. And then we have spears. Wowzers. Spears. Used to be up here. Probably should have been up there. But no, the lowly spear has been taken down several notches. Because of the amount of counterplay options you have against it, even if you still do have like insane high damage on certain versions of it, like your Nagis, like your Pikes, like all of those, they've been gutted as a setup because you can force a half hit and beat up on them and then roll in for days. And there's very little the spears can really do about it. Force that half hit, go in for a trade, and then snowball at them after that. I think the fact that they've gone down to, on my rule set, like 2 tiers here is kind of insane. It's absolutely nutso. And I think that it's, you could argue that the nerf was maybe a little bit too much. I think it's fine though, considering that they basically play off of very high ranging counter hits. So I think that's okay. We're just going to drop them there for now. Again, all of B tier is kind of interchangeable in a weird way. And there's some parts of it, the upper tier kind of muddles into up here. I think that this might still be better than C tier. In fact, I actually think that this is probably slightly better than these. Even if it is just a flaming strike stick and the range isn't great. I think that the fact that they can actually hit things like without for the other person making a mistake to be pretty good. So yeah, there you go. Halberds. Do I think that halberds are great, better than PS Spears now? So halberds requires a bit of a conversation because flaming strike is basically the biggest thing that would push it all the way up here. Without flaming strike, you have dagger, you have axe, you have sham, you have TS, you have off footwork, you have off beast's claw. You have all of these things you can pair with halberd that make it really, really spooky. It has good priorities, has really good range. It is very reactable, but you pair it with something that's either hard to react or impossible to react, and you have a little mix machine on your hands. The run R1 into run R2 mix when they try and strafe it. It's really good. Good free aims. The aim down to get extra range and catch people off guard. You have a lot of things. You also have the desync on the pull hard right in order to get the desync is also really, really strong. Yeah, I think that halberds are an incredibly strong setup, and I think that it's deserving of some consideration. And I think that with Flaming Strike, it would go even higher. But I think in its current iteration, it is currently better than Great Spears. By virtue of the setups it use. Hall Dag, Hall Stock, Hall Axe, Hall Shear. Even Hall Cat used to be a funny little counter pick I used to do into PGS, PSGS and UGS. So, yeah, good setup. Really solid. Baby's first meta setup. I like it a lot. I've always loved halberds ever since DS1. Yeah. There's not more that can be said about it. Now we get on to the last 3, and I've been here for far too long, ladies and gentlemen. Far too long. Whips. Annoying. Keep out setup. Yeah. I don't think they're great. I know that some people would argue with me. They're probably some of the best basic keep out in the game. But kite kind of works, but it also kind of doesn't. I'd put it probably below katanas. probably below spears. I think that these things kind of would struggle to catch it. But yeah, I'd probably put it about dead center in B tier. I think people can do good work with it, in the sense of you go for those CR1s, you can two-hand it to get better poise damage. It's low poise damage, good range. Arumi can hit like a truck. You have whatever the hell the new one is called that has the old Dark Souls 3 weapon art. It builds up poison, does decent stamina damage. I think whips are fine. Whips are an okay setup. It's just that everything that can get bullied pretty hard, and the only reason it wouldn't happen is because of setup diff. All right, fists. Now, some people, this is an argument whether or not thrusting sword is better than fists. Fist is an unreactable. Thrusting sword can interrupt it. Fist is a R2 on a read. Thrusting sword is I'm just going to walk away and punish it. Fists have insane damage. You can't hit what you can't catch. I'm going to go with the general community for now. My own personal opinion is it's somewhere here. Yeah. But the general community, I'm just going to concede it for everyone else. Fists, just because of that R2 dopamine, the R2 dopamine that gets released. Thrusting sword is a very difficult setup to play because it requires so much patience and so much core fundamentals in order to work it well. Your spacing, your timing, and the fact that you have to leverage your cancel windows. You can block as well, block cancel. You can go for R2s, kickflips to actually catch people off guard and steal prio, which if they panic, you can then follow up with the run R1 to then hit them. You have a run R2 that can cover an awful lot of ground. And for most setups, that is basically your win condition. Force the run R2 as a mistake and then punish it. But for the most part, most things can't hit thrusting sword unless the thrusting sword user messes up. I would consider it, again, here or here. That's basically the order. People have said that Shamshir is a good matchup into thrusting sword. We've seen in previous tournaments that isn't quite so much the case. Yeah. Fists, but fists. Onto fists. You have an unreactable run R1. You have an R2 that can have health bars. And you can buff it to high heavens with all of your tally stacks and your greases and a bunch of other stuff. And you can just nuke people. Starfists are arguably a broken setup just because they can roll reliably tier skip the second chance tier, which is insane. Yeah, I don't know. And it's pretty crazy. I've banned them just because I was bored of seeing them. Because every second match I would see in bracket would be Starfists. So on a personal note, it's a very common setup. A bunch of people try it. They try to go for those R2s to get insane damage. But on a very, very high level, this thing is a dance to watch. CR1s get used to deal with the tracking. Run R1s, jump attacks to try and close gaps. Jump R2s even in a very, very hard read. And I mean a very, very hard read. Your R2s, follow up R2s, your flaming strikes that can last forever. Starfist mirrors at a high level are beautiful to watch. But they can boil down to who's going to R2 first. So I like it at a high level. I don't like it kind of at lower levels of play. That's just me personally. Take it or leave it. I banned them because I was sick of them. All right, as we finish up then, oh my god, it's been 43 minutes. Jesus. I'm sorry, folks. The best setup in the game. Backhand blades. Unreactables. Unreactable runner. Well, unreactable. It just has an unreactable run R2. Unreactable CR1. Has an R2 that can catch people if they roll. That run R2 will nuke health bars. Your standing R1s have insane range. Your run R1 is probably faster than running and goes a longer distance. Its cancel windows are broken. Regular backhand blade is a war crime. Why, Michael Taki? Why? Why have you done this? Two-handed backhand blade is the most broken thing in the video game. And that's by a wide margin. I would say that this should be probably Claws of Night, Talons. And Talons are probably somewhere around here. But Claws of Night are probably a back here. Backhand blades just sweep everything. The only things that can even begin to compete are fists, thrusting sword, and maybe curved sword. Everything else just... And that's before you even consider the Broken Ashes, which are banned, by the way. Yeah. This thing is insane. It is just bonkers. It's banned in most rule sets. It's the only thing to not ban it that people have decided to go for upgrade restrictions, and it's still the best setup in the game. It's worst in class, still outcompetes everything else here. Oh god, why? In fact, do we? I think this is kind of that gives me the idea. This is flying off into heaven somewhere. It has ascended the tier list. I'm sorry, this thing is busted. Make it stop. We need it to stop. It has to stop. Please, Michael Zaki, nerf this thing into the ground. There is no reason why an unreactable, something that has not one but two means of doing unreactable damage, with decent range, just can have health bars, and there's that fast. It's just... They have no idea what they're doing. They don't know. They can't know. But yeah. There you go. There's your tier list. I'm not going to go on the rant because we're way ahead of time and I need to leave in like 2 minutes. This is the tier list. This is where we're at right now. I have to actually say that pretty much most setups in the game are usable in some capacity. That's actually kind of crazy how most things have some tool to be able to be in some way playable. So when people talk about that Elden Ring is unbalanced, what they really mean is these two things sweep everything else. The game is these two categories here and maybe a little bit of this here if you're feeling particularly spicy. You have a lot of setups that can do well in this game. So I just want people to realize that you have a lot of tools here. With or without Broken Ashes. This is without Ashes. This is mostly just thinking about what the setups can do in and of themselves. And yeah, there you go. Actually, I'm going to change that there. Probably going to leave that about there. I think I'm happy with everything else here. Maybe Hand to Hand and Beast Claws can go a little bit further up here because I think that they're just on the cusp. This, I don't even know what to do with this. But yeah. I think that, yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's actually kind of interesting. The game is in a much better state now than it was. Even if we can argue that these two things up here... Yeah, let's just leave it like that. Let's just leave it like that. Yeah. Fuck all in C and D tier. Well done, Michael Zaki. You did it. Alright. If you want to join tournaments... If you've lasted this long, I'm so sorry. I don't know how you did it. As I ramble for an hour about Elden Ring setups. Dear Lord. Yeah, if you're interested in joining tournaments, go to the description below and check out the Discord. We have 2 weekly events on and bi-monthly money tournaments for EU and NA. Along with some funny shenanigans that might happen in between. So consider joining, like and subscribe and all that shite. Love and appreciate you all. And take care. Bye-bye.